Good morning, everyone, and a big welcome to all of you to this conference. It's wonderful to see so many people who have so committed to their communities that they'll put aside this time and come to this conference. I want to extend an especially big welcome to those who have travelled some distance. I know there's people from the South Island, from Fiji, and I know what a commitment that takes to travel that far. And I just want to say we really do appreciate that. This conference is something that Ken, Gary, Phil and I have been looking forward to with excitement, as we believe it's only the beginning of some great things that can happen in our district. I know the question on many lips is, how come council has decided to do this? Well, true economic development comes as a bit of a surprise. Most plans tend to focus on straight business development and forget about the other aspect, the social component, that is the well-being of our communities. It has been said that the great enemy of freedom is the alignment of political power only with wealth. This single focus eventually destroys our well-being, that is the natural wealth of local economies, of household, of whānaus and communities. For too long, we in the far north have thought the solution is to encourage more people here, more tourists, more residents. But is that really the best solution? Instead, I believe that the wise move is to improve the well-being of our communities and the people that already live here, to look after the infrastructure and the resources that we already have. And when that is done, we can start looking at an increase in population or visitor numbers, or indeed if we really even need to do this. My dream is not to be the most wealthy, that is in terms of dollars, region of New Zealand, although I believe in many respects that we can be. No, my dream is for the far north to be the happiest region in New Zealand, for the region to be full of people who care for their whānau, care for their communities and care for their environment. People who will see an opportunity to help and just get on and do it. People who don't believe in just sitting back waiting for the government, or as we see all the time, the council, who they believe should be doing this, that or another thing. I know there is strength in the differences between us, but there's also comfort where we overlap. When communities come together, relate well and care, we can overcome almost anything. And don't be misled into thinking that your patch is too small. Whether you're a small business in Kaikoui, a large business in Kaitaia, a government employee in Kawakawa or a small holding in Hokianga, we all have a part to play in this jigsaw. We can all work together to make this the best place in New Zealand. But what about the alternative, the one that is focused on pure dollars? We could set our mind to helping the government achieve their aim of increasing GDP by 40%, exports that is by 40%. We could go hell for leather, milling our forests, exporting our foodstuffs and working hard to find anything and everything that we can export out of our region. But just like a business who focuses only on turnover, no matter what the cost, we won't last long. Our people won't be happy, our environment won't be happy, and our future generations will be left wondering what the hell were our grannies on when they decided to go down that track. We must stand up and say our people and our environment are every bit as important as GDP. Let me tell you a little personal story, which even though it happened some 20 years ago, still has a big place in my heart. My brother-in-law was concerned with the number of young people wandering about the streets at night, so he set up a youth group to give something for these kids something to do. It really opened those kids' eyes to a different world. One little boy in particular really stood out. Dougie was about 9 and he never wanted to go home. His mother was an alcoholic, he never knew his father, and 3 elder brothers were all in jail. My sister and brother-in-law started taking Dougie home, and people used to say, be careful. What about the impact on your younger children? But they continued to take Dougie home and give him a home life and a family that loved him, showed him the different way as often as they could. Dougie used to come up to our farm and stay quite a bit, and I remember one particular day quite vividly. I was in the kitchen and he and my daughter Marielle were sitting out on the veranda talking, and I heard Dougie say, "I would give anything to have parents like yours, to have somebody I know who loves and cares for you." I still feel a bit emotional when I think about that poor little boy who had nobody he could rely on. But anyhow, Doug did well. With help and encouragement, he went into a training course after school, and I don't believe he's ever been out of work for very long. He knows how to love and how to care. He's married now with his own family. But the scary part about it is he could so easily have been just like his brothers. No future, no prospects, and a drain on our society. This is the value of a caring society. If we all helped just one Dougie in our life, our world would be a better place. We have seen the impact of ignoring people who some believe are the dregs of society. Only last week we heard of a hard-working man who was murdered in his dairy by a 13-year-old. We can wonder what sort of upbringing that child had. We can also wonder what sort of a community he lived in. One of the marvellous things about community is that it allows us to welcome and help people in a way that we couldn't do as individuals. When we pool our strength and share the work and responsibility, we can welcome many people, even those with troubled lives, and perhaps help them find a better life for themselves and become contributors to our society. Where there is no community, trust, respect, and ethical behaviour is difficult for the young to learn and for the old to maintain. So this conference is about communities, about doing the best we can for our towns, our villages, our environment, and mostly for each other. It's about creating worthwhile and fulfilling lives for everyone and encouraging all members of our society to participate. I know it's hard, and most will say, "I cannot change the world," but just like a little stone cast across the water, you can create many ripples. So remember, this is just the beginning. There's some wonderful stuff we can do out there, and together we will make the far north a better place.
Good morning, Morena. I've got to do 10 minutes on the economy. First thing I will say is I'm not a bank economist, so I'm not here to sell you debt and say everything's rosy in the garden. I'm here to give you what I think is a fairly balanced approach to what's been happening in the far north economy. As we were all told in January, the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation described the New Zealand economy as a rock star for 2014. Now, I want to know here, hands up, who actually believes that the far north is a rock star economy? Oh, okay. One. All right. You're awake. That's the main thing. Next slide. Here's what the CTU Economic Bulletin had to say at the same time, and I think this sums up probably the mood of the audience today. It's easy to be a rock star when the rest of the world has laryngitis. I think you get the joke in and the sentiment as well. So, in 2008, what happened? Who can tell me what happened in 2008? Any ideas? Correct. There's a lot being said about the great financial crisis. Now, that to me says a few things, really. It's not admitting what actually went wrong. Really, if it was a great financial crisis caused by a few criminal bankers, then to solve the problem, you just lock them up and throw the key away. But it actually wasn't that. It was actually an organic crisis of the economic system. So really, where we are at the moment in world history and economic history is uncharted waters for the world economy. It's never done this before. They've used all the instruments that they would use in conventional times to maintain a fast-moving economy prior to 2008, and the world economy hasn't got many tools left in it from a classical economist point of view. So what did 2008 do for the Far North economy? Next slide. Carry on. I'll put up a load of figures. You may not see them, but fundamentally, from 2008 onwards, our GDP, which is in millions of dollars up there, has been stagnant. It's generally been stagnant. For the rock star of 2014, it's improved a little bit. So it's going to be about, what, $1.7 billion, $1.72 billion of GDP. But GDP doesn't always give us a clear picture of what's going on, but that actually is using classical methods to say that we have actually got a stagnant economy in the far north. Next slide, Martin. Right, what does this stagnant economy do for us? Well, from 2008, we've had growing unemployment every year up to 2013. It may have moderated slightly, but I think 10 or 11% unemployment in the far north officially is unacceptable. And that's where we're at in a rock star economy. Next slide. And what has it meant for our businesses? We will get these slides for you, so I'm sorry you can't read them all, but we'll get the slides. The figures are all there. We have growing business failure in the far north. There are roughly 750 less businesses in the far north than there were in 2008. The trend is still there. What we've actually seen in 2014 is a very similar pattern, and it's moderating, and it's a little bit better, but not great. I remember we had a job summit in 2009, I think, in the region. You may not have gone to that, but you know, we had the ASB economists there saying by 2010 everything will be back to normal. Well, it hasn't been. In fact, what I'm describing is a depressed economy. It's not the classical textbook definition of a depressed economy, but it certainly has all the attributes of a depressed economy. Next slide. So, as you can see, the far north is a depressed area economically. I know it's an unfashionable term, but the truth always is the best thing to talk about. They use buzzwords these days and all these type of things. So we have a very challenging economic environment, and it needs innovative solutions. And those solutions are in this room and in our communities. That's why we're here today. Next slide. Right then, I come from Yorkshire. If they want so doing, do it for this then. Where's Sue Jackson? Can you translate that for us, Sue? Absolutely correct. Next one. So there you go, that's the translation. In other words, the solution to our economic issues we face are here, and we need to do it for ourselves. And the reason we have that saying in Yorkshire, because we've always been one of those areas of Britain that's always had to do it for ourselves. We've always had to be resilient, because that's what it's like where I'm from. So to end with, what I'm pointing out is why we need to have resilient economies, why we need to do community economic development, and why we actually need to look at community solutions to the economic challenges we have ahead of us. I will give you a prediction now. There will be another major world economic downturn by the end of this decade. It will be as bad, if not worse, as the one in 2008. We have a breathing space to get our act together. It's going to be a rocky road this next 10 years economically. And I know there's all sorts of things saying, oh, everything's wonderful in the garden. I have a good chuckle myself at the radio news every now and again. But just to end with, all I want to say is, it's up to us. We can make that difference. We can make these economies up here in the far north work for us and for the benefit of our communities. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. I'd like to ask Jane Johnson to come forward. Jane has been working at Far North District Council for the last 2 years as the project manager for a project known as the Sustainable Growth Strategy.
Okay, so I don't have to yell, you can hear me. Scene setting, yes, as Ken said, I've been the team leader of a project called the Far North's Future 3050 project. We were to set about doing a sustainable growth strategy, working with communities, other government agencies and various people. What I learned on arriving in the Far North and starting to work with wonderful people like Ken and Gary is that things were not all rosy up here. And some people didn't want others to talk about that. And very quickly they were struggling. Some of them were struggling with how do they articulate what they're seeing around the district. And I accused Gary at one point of catastrophising, of being worst case scenario. You know, it was all doom and gloom and it was very pessimistic. Sorry, Martingi, can you see me? Thanks. But within a very short time, we were realising that we had some real experts that were reading the landscape very well. They're not just reliant on indicators, they understand their people, they've lived here for a long time, and they were really actually they had their finger on the pulse of what was happening. And they were telling us about things that were happening without the use of indicators. They didn't need infometrics. Ken had been working on community planning for a long time. Those kind of things were actually telling them what was happening. So we very quickly started turning around a presentation for councils where we said, there are a lot of challenges up here, but for every challenge, we're identifying there are opportunities associated with it. So quite quickly in 2012, we started talking about what's now being described as resilient economies or foundation communities. In global speak, we've noticed that it's now emerged as a movement called New Localism. And that's kind of a package of ideas around councils and bureaucracies, community structures, big structures, to provide shared infrastructure, community facilities, to manage public space, to provide the regulatory environment that councils provide, all of the functions of a council. They're becoming bigger than Ben-Hur for some communities. They become very expensive and very time-consuming. In an environment where your population is perhaps ageing, there's less money being made, people are moving out, there's not enough work of the workforce, there's not enough opportunity for young people. Thank you, Martingi. In fact, just put them all up. I've got a series of about 5, just push it maybe 5 times. Thank you. So Gary spoke briefly about some economic prompts. In this new localism or resilient economies framework, it's not just about the economy. The economy, in fact, is a reflection of other things that are happening out there. So things that are happening with our people, with our demography, with infrastructure and the demands for levels of service or for standards associated with core infrastructure, and also perhaps to do with the resource management regime, whether or not we've got the right moments for intervention, effective intervention around where people locate their activities. Now I can see some of you already, you might be glazing over, she's going on too long and it's too much about the systemic stuff. But as a strategic planning point of view, it's that whole system and how it interacts with each other, how the economy works with people, how people work with the economy, how they're using their resources, how the systems are designed to set up to support what they're doing, or whether or not they hinder, do they add to cost, or do they assist them. And under the RMA, what I'm talking about here is intervention moments are about the point when a person needs to get permission to do something from its council, or from those who want to control the effects of your activity. So with those things in mind, if we haven't got a lot of new activity going on, we haven't got very many intervention moments, do we? So how might we voluntarily introduce those moments to do things in a different way if you're not being regulatorily, if you're not required to do it? Thank you, Martingi. Next. So voluntary mediation. Population trends the last 50 years, I'll just quickly go through this. You can't see it from that board very well. Essentially this one down here is whangarei. You can see it's been gradually increasing. All of those lines at the top gradually increased to about 1986, which is this moment here, through to 1991. Most of those lines you see start levelling out. They start plateauing. Not more people being introduced into those townships. There are townships around the north. That dotted pink line that's scooting up there from 1978, You can all see that one? The line that's cutting through, doing something different to everywhere else, is Kirikiri. Just put that in perspective, 1978 was when the irrigation scheme was opened and people started subdividing for horticulture. If you can swap, next one please, Matangi. And I'll come back to that because of what it's telling us lately. That was only up to 2006 census. We waited 7 years instead of the usual 5 for the next census, and in 2013, those lines that had plateaued on all of those townships had actually started turning. They've all gone down. All of the populations across the district and all of our small towns have declined. So Peter de Graaf, who's a well-known Northern Advocate reporter, used this as a headline in October when those census stats were released. The exodus from the far north continues. Professor Natalie Jackman, who's at Waikato University, is a famous in New Zealand demographer, has also coined the phrase the end of growth. Not just because the population in our provinces has been declining, but because of the structure of that population. We have a very ageing population. Most of the people, the post-war baby boomers from 1945, over the last 20 years, when you saw that line going up in Kirikiri, they were hitting the 45-year-old bracket. And for the next 20 years, they matured through their life cycle, and they started hitting 65 about 2 years ago. So they're going into retirement. What that is describing is an ageing population, because those people were not replaced by children following them through their life cycle and producing other children and more families. So we had that headline. Thank you, Matangi. So Northland's resident population during that 7 years went up 2%. And there is the quote in the paper that Peter de Graaf put in about us being like most regions. It was a slowdown between 2001 and 2006, which in Northland had been about 6%. So people's economies, our economy, prior to 2001 and 2006, had been premised on growth across the region of about 6%. And you'll still hear the Prime Minister John Key talking about New Zealand's growth being pegged or linked very strongly to immigration. More people means more business, more activity providing for people. Thank you, Matangi. Keep going, one more. In fact, just put all of them up, so I'll tell you when to stop. That's it, stop. So everywhere fell. We had Kaitaia, the usually resident population falling by 6.1% to down less than 5,000 for the first time in many moons. Kaikoai fell 4.8%, Paihia by 2.7%. What's telling, and I put it in here, is that in March 2013, the visitor population in Paihia also fell by 50%. So, and alongside that, we have Whangarei and the Kaipara, our neighbours to the south, both increased in their visitor populations on census night. Now, census is off-peak, so it's not telling you the whole story about visitor movements or the tourist economy, but it is relevant to our economic development or to our activity because so many people are employed in hospitality and retailing in the far north. And a lot of our independent single sole trader businesses associated with the tourist industry as well. So they might all have come at different times of the year. Anyway, but across the far north, the total resident population fell by just 0.2%. So I think that should warm your hearts a little because it's not actually a stampede, it's not the exodus that you would have read in the headline. 0.2% is about 100 people less than in 2006. However, it's still relevant because we went from a trend line where a population was growing to a line that is pointing us downwards, and it's the difference between that upward movement and that downward movement that's most important. We've got a reversal of a trend. We were growing, now we're declining. That's the difference. What can we do to arrest that decline or at least prepare for a future where there might be less people and we might have to assume that our economic development won't be pegged to more people arriving. Thank you, Matangi. This slide, the 14%, and it's also not even. This is the point for the far north. The North Hokianga was the area with the greatest number of people that moved out. So 14% less people there. That's massive. That's a significant change. Russell, net minus 12%, Morewa minus 6%, Kaikoai and Kaitaia West at 5% and Kaitaia East at 8%. Thank you, Matangi. The point is, all of those places are like this one, Morewa. They're smallish towns, or they might be rural service towns. They're little. Morewa at -6%, if we just roll it down again, Matangi. What I'm trying to show is that this movement has actually been from our small towns. And from this graph, it's 1986 to 2013, you can see we were trucking up in the 80s. All of our small towns were growing quite rapidly. They levelled off, not a steeper rate, and it turned, and they've been in decline. If you can put up the next graph, Matangi. But there are implications with that. Just maybe 5 more. One of the things that we can see with this is affecting our economy is what if you have your children have moved out and you want to sell your home? We have a smaller market to sell to. Who are we attracting? So businesses and homes are for sale as people move through their life cycle, and they're for sale for a long time. At the beginning of last year, we did just a snap poll on Trade Me, did a bit of research around property sales. We found 3,900 for sale. That's about 10% of our whole district with 39,000 lots. They keep adding to the market and not being sold, and that's why you end up with such a lot. It's actually dropped back now to about 6%. I think it's dropped back because the revaluations came in last year and people had lost another 16% on their property values. That means over 6 years they'd lost about 30%. So we've got a huge implication there because we've got the drop in values which is pegged to sales and time on the market. It means people have lost equity in their prize asset. It means they don't have more money to borrow to replace the car, to build a retaining wall when theirs is falling down, to replace the roof. They've lost equity, so they can't spend. They're trapped in their homes, their partner dies, they can't afford to move into a retirement village. Massive implications for not just the economy, but for how we look after our communities. And lifestyle choices, obviously, is not just about the elderly. What's happening with our young people and their access to jobs and to education. Thank you, Matangi. This is just scene setting. How much time have I got more? 2 minutes? And I've put that up because men have been more mobile than women. We've got now these distorted communities that have way more women in them than men. And the people who have been leaving have been the youngsters between 15 to 25-year-olds heading out to join the workforce. Okay, now let's go back to the Kirikiri. What's happening there? And it is relevant. This was another headline, hit the Northern Advocate in October when the census data came out. Kirikiri, now our Auckland. I'm just going to examine that in closer detail for a minute. Have you got a clicker? Is it working now? Yay! He can relax. Pointed at the machine, let's hope it works. Okay, so Kirikiri's population grew 11.1% in the 7 years since the last census. I've written that statement again, because that's a true statement. I'd like to put it another way. The Kirikiri census area unit grew by 11.1%. That is a 1.6% per annum increase since 2006, down from 2.4% the year before, or the period before, over 5 years. At 2.4% per annum growth, you can expect a doubling of the population about every 20 to 25 years. So it's not even. Oops, went the wrong way. But this is the Kirikiri census area unit. It is massive. Remember the line that I showed you from 1978? It took off. Irrigation and water was provided to the district, to that area. Kirikiri Township is the little area in the middle. You might be able to faintly see the road network. There are about 2,000 people living in the Kirikiri Township connected to the wastewater system. To the north, where you can see Landing Road, that's Riverview, and across the little inlet, Rienga. With those 2 suburbs of Kirikiri included, who are not on the town sewage supply, they have potable water, they're part of the town water supply. There's another 1,000 people. So we actually have a population of about 3,000 in Kirikiri. What's happened all around this rest of the census area unit is massive subdivision of the horticultural lots. So while we've got this idea of Kirikiri being Auckland, Auckland isn't a horticultural village with 3,000 people living on large 6-hectare lots with ride-on lawnmowers and so on, because in fact we know that Kirikiri produces less horticulture than Henderson in West Auckland, less product. It's not a knock at Kirikiri, it's about accurate representation of the context. Why were people subdividing all around Kirikiri? Part of what was attractive was not having to connect to sewerage and to water schemes, and not having to pay commercial rates if you had your home business or another business attached to the house. And that's the development that's been most popular in the district. There's been those larger lot subdivisions. And it's continued to a point that we've actually got an oversupply. We've got a lot of vacant lots where people haven't built a home on those sections. Why is that relevant? Because think about that time period. From 1978 through to the last census, we were attracting 45 plus people with families. They've moved through their life cycle. We're moving into a time of aged and people moving into retirement. Where are we going to attract 45-year-olds with families to take up these spaces that we've created all around Kirikiri? But like I said, opportunity. These are the versatile soils, 6-hectare lots. What's going to happen in the future? Quick roundup. Paihia, by contrast, that's 3,500 people in a 3.5 kilometre square area. Big difference in census area unit. And there, the townships, you end up with a different mix of residents and non-residents present on census night, and you can see there are main towns. They do also offer opportunities in terms of resilient economies. If you're thinking about your infrastructure and about councils providing or communities doing more to meet their own needs, or new localism, or giving back. Last slide, development activity. What we actually see, the red here, and I apologise that it's not larger, the red are the existing townships. All around them, and particularly in the east coast and eastern seaboard, the purple are low density lifestyle lots, so rural residential and coastal residential. The yellow, all through here, all over the joint, in the far north, through Peria Valley, around Coopers Bay, Doubtless Bay, and the eastern seaboard, particularly down here around Kirikiri in the back of Bay of Islands. That's all the less than, all we've mapped there is everything that's less than 6 hectares. So you can imagine in a future, if we did attract a lot more people, they are our most fertile valleys. The extensive areas of flatland. Everything else is pretty rugged, doesn't have great soils and all the rest of it, so it's in pastoral farming or forestry. And I'll finish with that because really all I was asked to do was set the scene a little bit. It's a bit of other context that goes with the economy, and to describe that we're not just talking here in economic resilience or resilient economies conference. It's about a broader connection too, about how people operate in terms of our what we're trying to do as communities with our shared services, looking after people, what's happening in our communities, who's living here, and what are those opportunities going forward in terms of how we might like to operate, who we're attracting to live here, who we're trying to retain, so we don't have everybody moving to Australia or to Christchurch to help in the rebuild.